Hello and welcome to today's Sunday edition of Property Pillars. I appreciate you very much for joining me. My name is Toyin Davidson Iro, and as usual on a Sunday evening, I appear before you and I talk to you and we have a discussion about property. And I wanted to start by an introduction about Property Pillars, what we do, and I'm hoping that from that discussion we're to get you to be involved and to be engaged. Now, Property Pillars is a production and marketing company which started about a year ago here in Milton Keynes. And it started really from a passion of mine to give information to people in specific property situations through the experts who were practicing these areas every day. And from that developed a chat show which became aired on Sky TV. And from that, we decided to start a Facebook Live episode where we can engage with people concerning property matters. By day, I am a lawyer. I'm a property litigation lawyer and I have been so since 1999. And by night, I'm a wife and a mother of 3 children. So I want to welcome you all to this wonderful Sunday evening, episode number 14. And on today's episode, we're going to be talking about the essentials, things you should know when you're buying a leasehold property. This is what this episode is about. Now, generation rent is something that the government want to address. As you know, they're putting in £1.5 billion to build more affordable homes for people to live in. And the majority of those homes are affordable housing, most of which fall into the category of leasehold. So I thought, in the light of the government's desire to see more people get onto the property ladder, and bearing in mind that there's more leaseholders now available than historically, I thought to talk about the things to look out for when you're buying a leasehold will be a very helpful discussion for us to have. I must tell you that you must consult your solicitor if there's any aspect of your lease that you're concerned with. This isn't intended to be legal advice to you. This is intended to be general information and a broad discussion. So do feel free to comment, to share, and to subscribe. Okay? So thanks, and off we go. The essentials when you're looking to buy a lease. Now, let's start from the beginning. There's 3 different types of title ownership in the UK that's recognised. There's what they call a freehold, a leasehold, and a common hold. Those are the 3 different types of ownerships you can have of a property in the UK. We know what a freehold is. A freehold is when you hold the title absolute in your name. And with a freehold, you are responsible for maintaining the grounds yourselves, and you're responsible for an indefinite period of that lease. Or there isn't a lease, actually, the freehold is all yours, and you hold the title in what they call absolute. The opposite to a freehold is a leasehold, which you hold the title for a term, which means that during that term, you have obligations as a leaseholder to the freeholder, and you have obligations to the freeholder, some of which can be quite good, some of them can be quite bad. But the long and short of it is you don't hold the title absolute. Now, leaseholdings is very common with flats, and it's becoming increasingly common with new builds houses as well, because when it comes to common parts and maintaining the grounds, the freeholders like to maintain control of those areas and carve you a lease. The third type of category of legal ownership is now known as a common hold, which is a share of the freehold, which is again a new instrument started in the Leasehold Reform Act 2002 legislation. So common hold is now becoming another very popular form of ownership of property. But today we're specifically talking about leasehold, which is where we want to talk about the essential things you ought to know. Now, as I've said, a lot of people are looking to buy into properties, especially for Help to Buy scheme being readily available for first-time buyers. And a lot of people who are looking to move into city centre apartments are finding themselves having to buy leasehold properties because they're flats, which means that there are certain things you should look out for. Because when you're buying a leasehold property, it's important for you to be aware of your obligations and what a lease is. And one of the things I said I'll suggest to you, and these I've got 7 points I want to bring to your attention when you're buying a leasehold. Number 1, check the current length of the lease. Yes, that's very important. Now, the lease has a time that it must start and it must have a time when it must expire, because you're not the freeholder. A length of the lease can vary between 50 to 100 years, or 50 to 99 years, or 1,000 years. But it's important for you to check what the length of your lease is. A good length should be no less than 80 years. Most people, when they're looking for a lease, you should look out for a lease of no less than 80 years. And the reason why that's important is that if you have a lease of anything less than 80 years, on its expiry, you may have to apply to the leaseholder, the freeholder, to extend that. And that can be a very expensive process. So it's always important to check the length of the lease and look for a lease of no less than 80 years. That's the first thing. The second thing I would suggest is that you make sure you have a very good solicitor who understands the obligations that come with leaseholders, so they can advise you thoroughly. Make sure you get in touch with a lawyer that does leaseholders and is able to advise you about your obligations on the lease. For example, there's some obligations that require you not to, for example, sublet. Yeah, some obligations that require you to maintain certain aspects of the building. Some obligations that prevents you from assigning the lease. Some obligations that prevent you from carrying out specific type of external repairs. The obligations can be quite onerous, so it's important to get a lawyer that has a knowledge of the lease and is able to explain to you the ramifications of the obligations that you as a leaseholder will be going into. Okay, so that's my second tip. My third tip is make sure you know what the ground rents are. Now that's very important. Now, ground rents are rents that the freeholders will charge. It's normally a peppercorn rent or nominal rent. However, in some leases, there are conditions that allow the freeholder to increase the ground rent or triple the ground rent as and when a specific period or time occurs. So it's important to check through your solicitor that the ground rent that you're paying is something that you are happy with. So you've got to find out what is the ground rent and what is the budget for my ground rent, and am I happy with the arrangements to pay. As a matter of fact, I actually recommend that when you do have ground rent, you make sure you have an idea of the 5 years expectation of ground rent before you decide to buy the property. So check how much the ground rent will be and have an anticipation of 5 years worth of how much you're paying for that ground rent. The next thing I like to advise you to do is important. This is to do with the service charges. The service charge is a major issue that I've dealt with as a lawyer in my practice, where service charges become subject to a tribunal dispute because the leaseholder hasn't been happy with the service charge and they've been issued proceedings by the freeholders for forfeiture. So service charge is something that is a major part of leasehold, and it's important for you to be aware that service charges are payable to the freeholders for certain things. For example, the freeholder will be an obligation to maintain the grounds, to clean the gardens, to clean the gutterings, to have insurance on the building, to maintain the common parts, to put the lighting, to clean, to insure against fire, earthquake damage, and all the things that you share as a communal living. The freeholders will charge you a service charge fee for that facility. And some service charges can be very hefty. So I've seen situations where service charges have been up to about £25,000 per annum. I've seen service charges of about £600 per month. And, you know, you've got to be aware that service charges is part and parcel of when you buy a leasehold property. So you must check that you're happy with the service charges from the onset and you're happy with the projection of what you need to pay. There's also a condition in some of the leases that says if there are major works required in the building, you must pay a percentage of those major works. For example, if the freeholders want to put a new roof in or provide new guttering or new drainage, and there's quite a hefty fee to pay, you are required to contribute into that levy, that little pot, and that contribution can be quite a lot. So it's important to find out whether the freeholders intend to do any major works on the property whilst you are a leaseholder. And find out who the freeholder is my tip number 5. A lot of people buy into these buildings without actually knowing who the freeholders are. It's really important you have an identity behind the freeholders, because from understanding who your freeholders are, you're in a position to know how you can approach them if you have problems with them. You'll be very surprised that some freeholders have property management companies between you and them that actually deal with the management of the block. And those are the people you will tend to deal with administratively, to deal with any matters whilst you're in the block. But because if you wanted to have any issues that would result in litigation, it's important for you to know who the freeholders ultimately are, so that you can have some understanding and some dialogue with them. And you can also find out a bit more about them. Go online and check who the freeholders are. Check how they have maintained their blocks, how they've dealt with their leaseholders, how they've dealt with disputes in the event of disputes, how they've maintained the drainage, the buildings, and how reputable they are. They're really important that you have a reputable freeholder and you're in a position to have a strong freeholder that's got a strong administrative support, because you don't want a freeholder that's going to go bankrupt or have a sinking fund that's nothing there when major works are required. Although there are obligations upon the freeholders, however, I'd always advise you to check who your freeholders are. The next thing I'd like you to do is to check your lease carefully. I have had a situation where certain ground rent, I have got an article that I wanted to share with you, newlyweds, it says, newlyweds unable to sell home due to legal catch, the doubles ground rent every decade. Now, I know you can't see that article there, but it says newlyweds unable to sell home due to legal catch, the doubles ground rent every decade. I'll get that article for you. Now, that article was written in the, I think it was the Sunday Times, about a young couple who purchased a flat, and there was a condition in the lease that said the ground rent will be doubled every 10 years. Now, this was something that was reported in the paper. That's the article and the photograph of the couple there. And obviously, because of that, they found themselves not able to sell the flat because subsequent buyers who saw the condition were put off from buying that property, because ground rent doubling every 10 years was making it uneconomical and unattractive for prospective buyers. That's just an example of something that you need to look out for. So when you're looking through your lease, get a lawyer who understands and can interpret the obligations under the lease and can go through it carefully with you so that you're not caught out in future. Speak to other leaseholders in the block is my next tip. Always speak to other leaseholders in the block, because you want to find out how acrimonious the relationship with them, with each other has been, and also their relationship with the freeholders or the management company has been. Because if you're buying a lease, you should understand that you're living in shared accommodation, and you have to share common parts, and you have to share facilities. Some people don't have good relationships with their freeholders, which makes the whole environment of living there can be very tense. So it's important for you to make inquiries with the neighbours who are currently living at the property and find out how are the relationships between the freeholders and the leaseholders, and how the relationship between the leaseholders generally with one another. I've seen horrible neighbour disputes between leaseholders over rubbish being dumped outside the front door. On the same floor, you've had disputes where leaseholders have said, you're dumping rubbish outside your front door. I wanted you to put it in the chute, and I'm allowed to put it outside my front door. When I take it, it's my business. And between the two of them, they've entered into disputes. You'd be surprised, because when you live in communal accommodation, shared accommodation like that, the possibilities of entering into disputes can be quite high. So it's important to find out what are the disputes and what are the dispute resolutions mechanisms in place. Do you have a management committee for the leaseholders where you can all come together and discuss your common bonds, your common issues, so that you can vent it? Do you have an environment where you have the property management company has a place where they can update you as to what repairs they're planning on doing, what they have done, and their budgets for the building, how they want to carry out those plans? Do you have a place where you can have notices so people are aware of any changes in the environment, if there's dustbin collection, if there's problems with graffiti, if there's problems with noise and nuisance, where people can air their issues? Is there an environment where people can have a communication forum in that block? So you should speak to the other neighbours and make sure that those things are there, because a well-run block where you've got 100 leaseholders, if it's not done properly, it can be very uncomfortable and it can be a nightmarish situation. So make inquiries. And finally, make sure you check whether in future you can potentially buy the freehold if it's an option available to you. Like I said, there are shared freehold facilities in these days where people have the ability to buy a freehold from the lease that they've acquired. So it isn't uncommon to buy a share of a freehold. So it's important from the onset to check whether you're the type of tenant or you're the type of leaseholder who is able to buy the freehold of his leasehold in future. So it's something that you should look into. But that is the discussion for today. I would invite anybody to comment if they've got any questions and if they'd like to add anything to it. But today's discussion was the essential things you should look out for when you're buying a leasehold. And I hope that they have been very useful to you. If there's any information that you'd like from myself or a member of my team, do send us an email or drop us a line at propertypillars@gmail.com, and we will reply back. And give us a call on my business line, which is 0788 971 6462, or visit our website, which is www.propertypillars.co.uk. And can I remind you to also subscribe to our YouTube channel, because we've got lots of wonderful interviews we've held with experts on there that you can gain a lot of valuable property information from. And if you follow us on Instagram and Twitter. But that brings us to the end of my Sunday discussion today, and I hope that has been very beneficial to you. Like I said, Property Pillars is a consultancy. We help source properties, we help arrange finance, we advise and consult new buyers and investors in terms of their property requirements, and we have a team of experts who are available on hand for coaching and mentoring. So if any of that seems of interest to you, do get in touch with us and we'll be delighted to help you. But that brings my discussion to an end this Sunday, and I appreciate those who have joined me today. I thank you so much. So I'll look forward to seeing you all again next Sunday for another property discussion. But until then, thank you and goodbye. Bye.